Before this podcast, we would like to give a massive thanks to Keith at KMR Audio, who has provided us with all the equipment we have needed to launch our podcast.
Keith has hooked us up with some premium equipment, and if you're in the market yourself for some high-end audio recording equipment, then head over to kmraudio.com.
The balls are shown.
The balls are shown.
The balls are shown.
Hello and welcome to the Ball Sessions, a podcast where we delve into the lives and the stories of successful millennials. My name is Ross Jeffries, and as always, I'm joined today by Henry Martin.
Hello.
And Tom West.
Great to be here.
For session 007, we are hugely excited to be joined by Christian May, editor of London's most read daily business newspaper, City A.M. Christian, thank you very much for coming. How are you today?
Very well, thanks. Pleasure to be here.
Can you please give everyone an overview of City A.M.?
I can certainly give it a go, assuming you have readers who don't pick it up every day, a notion which I would indulge. City A.M. is 12 years old, which means it's new in the printed press industry. It was founded 12 years ago by a couple of guys who still own and run it, who saw a gap in the market for a lively but intelligent, sort of pro-business, pro-market, liberal voice in the printed business media. And you can infer from that perhaps the existing printed media products are not necessarily as robust and as pro-business and as liberal in their mindset as the founders felt City A.M. should be. And it has grown, and it's certainly grown online. And I may as well get this in early, that I was pleased to see the latest figures from the Audit Bureau circulation just in the last few days, which shows City A.M. as the only printed product whose circulation has not decreased over the last 12 months. Indeed, it's gone up. So we're very pleased with that. And I think it's testament to the fact that it's a niche product. It is niche. It is self-selecting. It is very carefully selected where it's handed out and who we target as readers. But there are, depending on which audit you choose to look at, between 200 and 300,000 average daily readers of the print product.
That's an awful lot, yeah, especially when you are quite selective. It almost opposes the other ideas of all media that just want to get into every nook and cranny of the country, and if not the world.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time for the media industry. Leaving aside your editorial priorities, as an industry, it's extraordinary. And you can look at 10 different media organisations and they'll have 10 different strategies, most of which are digital, and they range from full premium content behind the paywall, times FT, down to a model which basically says we need as many eyeballs on the website as possible, Mail Online, Guardian, a quality version of that same approach, if you like. And we're going to be somewhere in the middle for a digital strategy, because we are a niche product in terms of our content, and self-selecting. People who want business news, finance, economic, politics news will come to the site. But the print product, as the figures that I just referred to attest, it is a core element of what the company still is about.
It is. Well, I would think we were going to. I don't know whether we should get onto it straight away, but the kind of, because we did want to ask you about this, about how, like, what you're sort of doing to adapt, because obviously so much media now is transferring to online, like you say. But I suppose that's kind of ruined a few of our questions. Now you've come up with that stat. with that stat.
I can burst that balloon pretty early on. That's fine. Obviously, things are changing, and the commercials of printed news are, I wouldn't say they're the same across the board, because there's huge variation, but you pick any media product which is currently in print, leaving aside their digital strategy, including their digital revenue generation. If you just look at the printed products, it is the case that all of the lines for display ad revenue, printed advertising revenue, are going in the same direction. Now, depending on your product, they're either going down like a black run or a green run. I don't alienate non-skiing listeners with my terminology. And I suppose the decline of print ad revenue from our perspective is noticeable, but very modest. So we perhaps have more time to adapt than other organisations who are looking at 15-20% declines in print ad revenue, not to get too boring too early on. And we have, again, this is all audited. for a print product, and I do leave aside the digital side of things, but for a print product, we have the highest percentage of ABC1 demographics reading the product in London, highest disposable income, etc. They are an informed, ambitious, internationalist audience who choose to pick up City A.M. and either read it in 10 minutes to just get to work a bit smarter, or love it cover to cover and read it over the course of a day. But our audience is, I suppose, from an advertiser's perspective, is pretty high calibre.
Yeah. And that does that impact a lot, I suppose, with advertising? I don't know how that kind of works within newspapers, but is that...
Yeah,
is it selective?
Fortunately, I don't have a huge amount day-to-day to do with the commercial side of the business. But, I mean, on that point, I think two things to observe. One is which, because of the size of City A.M, there are only sort of 50, 60 people in the entire organisation, about 30 of whom are editorial in my part of the office. But it's a small enough organisation that I would have to go out of my way to not be aware of the commercial reality of what we're doing. But also, I think any editor worth their salt in this day and age should be aware of commercial realities. Now, that is not to say at all that they have to make decisions based on commercial awareness and realities, but I mean purely on the ground. If I want to make the case for pay rises for the reporters, or investment in a new product, or hire a new journalist, I need to know what our financial landscape looks like and when might be a good time or a bad time to make that case. So I'm aware of what's going on commercially, but we have a very good team. The MD, the COO, the director of sales, etc. They all know exactly what they're doing, and day to day they are chasing revenue for print advertising, which, given our readership that I just outlined, tends to be luxury goods, jewellery, pens, cars, wealth management, asset management services. Online as well, there's a few different commercial products. We have a stable of magazines that we obviously seek to monetize, and there's sort of, I suppose, if you've got the product, the printed product, the magazines, and the website, those three areas are all monetized at the moment. There's a fourth area of the business which has not really been monetized as effectively as it could have been, which is the readership. And so there's going to be a real focus over the next few months and beyond to engage with the readership in terms of events and partnerships and lifestyle ideas to sort of monetize, not to be too crass about it, that fourth element of the business, which is a very engaged, very informed, quite high earning readership.
And you touched on the events and the campaigning, and obviously I actually got to sort of see you first up through the Institute of Directors. I saw you at the House of Commons talking about Brexit. And would you say that you relay that experience that you had with the Institute of Directors for sort of pushing on City A.M?
I remember that speech. And occasionally I like to shock a business audience by giving them my full red-blooded pro-Brexit speech, which comes out of me from time to time. I had a great time. I was at the Institute of Directors for a few years before I moved to City A.M. And City A.M. was my first journalistic job, therefore, and certainly my first editorial level job. It was a very unusual move. I'd always been in and around the media. I'd worked in Westminster, I'd worked for think tanks and civil liberty campaign groups and freedom of speech groups and free market groups, and always on that kind of side of the debate. And I was working at the Institute of Directors, which is one of the oldest business organisations in the country. And I was their head of campaigns and public affairs and their spokesperson, really. So I had a great time there because we were able to sort of push the debate on matters that were of interest and important to us at the time, leadership there at the IOD, which were things like pro-business, pro-free market positions, pro-immigration positions, but actually in a way that surprised quite a lot of commentators. We also held business to account for failure. We held them to account for excessive pay in instances where their share price returns had not been as they should have been. Do you know what I mean? So we'd actually pushed quite hard on standing up against market failures. Or if you want to defend free markets, which I've done for the last decade, you can't put your head in the sand when there's evidence of them not working or whether they've been manipulated or abused. So we were very robust. I always thought of ourselves, you take the CBI for example. I thought of them as quite a sort of turgid and corporatist viewpoint from the CBI. Get them on your podcast, I'm sure they'd disagree. That was how a lot of people viewed them. Alongside, at the time when I was at the IOD, were very sort of robust, liberal, free market, much more outspoken sort of policy voice, and I enjoyed that hugely. And that's where I was in 2015, just after the general election, when by a sort of series of fortunate events and introductions, the proprietors of City A.M, who I'd never met before, invited me out for dinner and concocted this scheme whereby I became the editor of City A.M. So it was a very unusual meal. It was a Chinese on College Hill in the city. I won't forget it in a hurry. I wasn't quite sure why I'd been asked to meet them. I had a hunch that they were seeking to hire a political editor, which I thought I might be able to do some interviews and do some features. But when they said, well, here's our idea, I was completely stunned, and remained stunned for quite a long time, actually, after that.
And how was it adapting to a role that you hadn't necessarily been involved with before?
Well, it was extraordinary because, on the one hand, there was a great deal to learn. I mean, everything from the lingo to the mechanics of putting a newspaper together, not to mention the kind of editorial judgment that 3 years in I'm still honing, and I imagine if I stay in this game, I'll be honing it for the rest of my career, because it's not something that you just get or you don't get. But, so there's that experience side of it that obviously I had a lot of catching up to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never been in an environment like it, by which I mean a daily print newspaper, a 24-hour cycle, which everything I'd ever done before, I'd done some big jobs before, and I'd had some interesting roles before, some of which had some quite high-profile elements to them, but there'd been peaks and troughs. Maybe there was a bit of a quiet time, or you knew that there was something coming up that was going to take all your time and energy, or you were working towards a campaign or an event. But in a daily print news organisation, where it's just 24 hours, Monday's paper, Tuesday's paper, Wednesday's paper, took some time to get my head around, because you pour everything in to doing Monday's newspaper, and then it has a very short shelf life by definition. It's on the floor of the tube carriage by 8 o'clock in the morning, and no one's going to pat you on the back for it, because it's all about Tuesday's newspaper and then Wednesday's newspaper. So actually, it remains the case that looking further ahead than just tomorrow's edition is the biggest challenge of my job.
When's the switch over? When do you say, oh, Mondays is out, or are you already thinking about Tuesdays, even halfway through Mondays?
We have our weekly editorial meetings, and we have things in the diary that we know are coming, and there are political summits and corporate results and all these sort of on-diary items that you know are coming and you can prepare for, particularly things like the budget or Brexit summits, etc., or elections. But actually, what is by far the most interesting part of the job is that you don't know what's going to come in the news agenda on any given day, and because our printed product goes to print at about 1:45 in the morning, which is many hours after any of our competitors go to print, we will be filling gaps in the paper right up to midnight and beyond, which is very exciting. And I've had grounds to change the front page around midnight 5 or 6 times in the past, which certainly quickens the pulse a little bit. But that's very important to us. Our niche is that we go to print very late, and we will have the most up-to-date news. In this instance, it allows us to look at the Asian markets, to see what's going on in the evening in America in particular, and so we do that. Now, I'm not naive enough to assume that gone are the days that if you don't pick up your newspaper in the morning, you've missed your chance to get the news that day. I mean, obviously, people can pore over their phones as much as they like, but what we set out to be is a curated, printed product that you can trust and that you should pick up, and that you can reliably assume will have the latest news and analysis in it. And that's our niche. We're prepared to stay out very late in order to deliver that each day.
Touching on that front page sort of last minute edit, we were all talking before you joined us today. How is that sort of set out?
Yeah.
Is it all just bumped out at the last minute and people just get one page further back in the newspaper, or is it all structured and then you've just got to try and mix and match as best as you can?
Well, the way the day tends to shape up is that at about midday, actually, we'll have our first editorial conference, deputy editor, digital editor, the news editor, etc. And put that into context, of course, the Evening Standard's gone to print by that point. We are, of course, serving opposite ends of the day.
Yeah.
The Evening Standard goes to print first or second edition between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. And it's at that time that we sit down and start to think about the next morning's newspaper. And so at about midday, we'll be going through the news list that's been compiled. The news editors sat with the reporters already. They've got a sense of who's doing what and what's going on. I'll go through that news list. We'll look at the flat plan, literally page by page layout on a piece of A3, and we'll have a sense of what our priorities are and what we want to put our resources into and what we know or feel is going to be nearer the front, if not the front page. By the time we sit down again later at about 4 o'clock to finalise those decisions with a few other people who've come into work and come into play, we then know what we're going to be doing. It will happen once a week, twice a week that we have an idea for a front page that is dependent on something being announced at 9 or 10 o'clock that night, and we'll need a plan B. But generally speaking, we like to know what we're doing by about 7 o'clock in the evening, and then of course if things happen, and we hope they do, if things happen and start to change the shape of the front page and we need to move things back onto the inside, then we do that, and we're quite...
Whereas the other papers have already gone to print and it's too late for them. So that's why you want things to happen late on in an evening, so you'll effectively got the inside scoop.
I mean, I'll stress again, I know that it's not the case that there's no way of getting your news in the morning if you don't pick up the newspaper, that go and buy a newspaper. Those days are long gone. However, our pitch is that we will be the most up-to-date, curated, trusted print brand on this patch, which is business, finance, economics and politics, and there are times that are quite rewarding, where I think we're the only newspaper that carried the death of Steve Jobs, for example. Where there are times when we're the only newspaper that gets the latest news out of New York or Washington in particular. And that's important to us, because of course you can get your news from other devices and other platforms at any time you want. I think actually there is such a sort of over-service in news and opinion at the moment that the attractiveness of a product, a physical product that somebody has curated, and don't forget, in a newspaper, any newspaper really, nothing is in there just to fill space. Nothing is in there by accident. Everything, including the small news in brief column on page 24, is there at the expense of something else that didn't quite make it in. So whether it's your front page story or your editorial comment or the items you selected for further back in the paper, it's there because somebody, in this instance me, and my senior colleagues, have chosen it because we think that's of importance, or it's valuable, or it's particularly insightful, or it's very relevant, or you should know about it, or whatever it might be, or it's fun. This is something we try and play with quite a lot at City A.M. It's there for a reason, and that includes the front page as much as it includes the smaller items in the back. So it's a curated product that we want people to feel there is great value in, because everything in there has been chosen to be of use or of interest to a very specific readership early in the morning the next day.
And how difficult is it then to decide what makes print? As in, which articles you leave out, which articles you choose and select? How difficult is that decision to make on a daily basis?
That's a very interesting question, and something we debate every day. And I was debating it moments before I arrived here in your studio, and I will pick up that debate when I go back to the office after this recording, because there are some things that ultimately the editor decides, and I will decide what I think has the most significance or weight or value, as I just said, whether that's the front page or back on the inside pages. I'll have to be conscious during that process that we are a business newspaper, and so stories that might not set the world alight about the quarterly results of a FTSE 250 listed company, or a personnel move at a particular financial institution, or the report of a private company that we've been keeping an eye on. Those kind of stories they're not going to be your front page. They're not going to give you your great pun opportunities. They're not going to have great design work with them, but they're very important. And we'll cover a huge number of sectors on any given day in print. And I'm conscious that I'm not talking a lot about the website at the moment, but it is a slightly different kettle of fish. But for print, we will cover every day politics, economics, finance, of course, corporate news, of course. Within that, we're going to be looking at retail sector, pharmaceuticals, commodities, banking, property, tech and fintech in particular. So on all of those things, you want to make sure that what you're presenting is of value and of importance. And you're not always going to get that right. And sometimes you'll you look at your flat plan later in the evening and you'll think, okay, that story it feels a little old by now. It feels a little old now. We need the space. Get rid of it.
It must be like it sounds like it'd be manic in there. I don't know if it actually is, but on the kind of face of it, because in terms of sort of stuff like quality control, how does that work? And proofreading, all that stuff.
Yeah, because it sounds like it has to be like almost an instant decision, yes or no, on everything.
That's it.
And you just kind of trying to find an order.
I'm not saying you'll get every decision and every editorial call right, and when you don't, but which you won't really realise until the next morning when you'll wake up and you think, I can't believe we didn't have this, or we should have made a bigger deal of that. And you feel that quite acutely. But what I have to say is that there are some very, very talented people at City A.M, from the design desk to the night desk to the editorial level, and among our reporting pool. And my deputy editor, who's been there about 7 years, which is 5 years longer than me, is very, very good. And so between us, we know how the day should work and how it's going to run and what our main points of the day are going to be. In terms of the editorial decisions, there are some days, and actually these are the boring days, where you sort of know what's going to be on the front page, or you can make decisions quite early on and it doesn't really change throughout the evening. What you like are when I stick my head out of my office in the newsroom at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the evening and say, all right, everyone back into my office, we're changing everything. And that's great, actually. That's what you want to do, and there's the team are more than capable of adapting to that. And it also has to be said that the team, and I'm thinking particularly of the two night editors who were there from about 4 in the afternoon right the way through to close of play for us at 1 a.m. They will also make decisions in my absence. I mean, I think if they're major decisions, they'll give me a call. But they're very experienced and very good at saying this story's now old or this has just hit the wires, and we'll slot that in. So if they know what they're doing, the design team know what they're doing, the distribution team know what they're doing, the drivers know what they're doing. So I suppose it's important that I know what I'm doing as well. But it's a very good team, and it's a small organisation. Financial Times has, I think, about 800 journalists. I have 15. Okay, so we can't compete on every level. So
and you've got to pick your battles, haven't you?
Absolutely,
really, more than anything.
We will select the levels that we think we can compete on, and that will include a real London focus, a strong editorial line that we think is of value and in sync with our readership, and also a sort of great international late-breaking news focus as well. So you pull these things together, and you do get quite an identifiable product, I think.
Yeah.
Do you think Brexit has almost played into City A.M.'s hands slightly? Because there's obviously been certain companies that think, oh, we need to go abroad into Europe. But a lot of people that are elsewhere in the UK have ended up congregating a bit more in London. So you're actually sort of having a bit more of a magnet to the city. And then you're bringing, obviously, the talent, money, business into London. Would you say that's probably helped City A.M.'s readership?
Well, I think it's too early to tell whether Brexit has helped London in the way that you just put it. It's a compelling argument. But I know it's helped City A.M. in the sense that I have a lot of people, albeit anecdotally, who will say to me, I didn't used to pick up City A.M. or I didn't used to seek it out because I didn't think it was relevant to me. It was a business, finance newspaper. And I have an increasing number of people who will say to me, particularly in Westminster, that they do now, because actually you can't get the political arguments that this country is currently engaged in if you don't understand the economic and corporate context that those conversations are being had in. So, and I know that the referendum campaign itself, let alone the results, definitely contributed to an uptick in the number of people picking up our newspaper.
Yeah.
So when things happen in the world that you just can't ignore, you're going to look for a newspaper to bring yourself up to speed. And City A.M. in a lot of places, but by no means exclusively, but in a lot of places was that newspaper.
Picking up the Metro and reading Crush on the Tube doesn't really give you too much help outside of a bit of a giggle, does it really? That's probably what you're saying a little bit.
I think the Metro put out a lot more copies of their newspaper into the Tube network. I think, assuming if all things were equal and you had a choice whether to reach for a copy of City A.M. or a copy of Metro, possibly depend on how hungover you were, and whether you just wanted something to sort of chew over for a few minutes, but I mustn't be too disparaging of the Metro. They have well, I won't be, they have their niche in the way that we have ours.
Yeah, that's it,
and
isn't it?
they have their appeal, and we have ours. And you're right that there isn't a great deal of overlap.
It must be a massive advantage that it is a free newspaper that you can just pick up on your way to work. Like, you don't have to go out of your way to go and get it.
Absolutely.
That must
I
help.
mean, if you take the fact of the situation being that as a free media product, we can't charge access to the website.
Yeah.
Website's pretty much 24/7. You'll find all of the content that makes it into the newspaper is also online, plus a great deal of other content. So the online offering is there, and there's hundreds of thousands of people a week who just go to cityam.com. But the newspaper has got a number of assets. One is that it has managed over quite a short period of time to cement itself as part of people's morning routine, and you shouldn't mess with people's morning routines. So if for whatever reason we're not at Weybridge Tube Station by 6 o'clock in the morning, I will hear about it by people emailing me and saying, what the hell? And I hear about it all the time, actually, that we're not there, and it is a source of frustration that we can't be everywhere. But the distribution team is exceptionally good at allocating a finite resource in the most economic way that they can.
Mm-hmm.
So, 95,000 copies of City A.M are printed overnight. Where do you put them? Well, they're put in very strategic places, and if they're not picked up in sufficient numbers at one place, then they will stop putting them there and they'll try them somewhere else. So there's about, I think I'm right in saying, there's about 400 commuter locations that they're distributed to in the morning from about 6 a.m. And about 1,300 office locations that take delivery of them as well, that people can then pick up at work. So we'll shift about 10,000 copies by hand distribution down at Canary Wharf each morning, similar number at Liverpool Street and London Bridge and Waterloo, and a lot of them make their way into offices and sort of just circulate around the building, I suppose, like that. And people can also download a PDF version of the paper online, and that's quite a sort of 1990s way to do it, but people like doing it, more so than they just like browsing the website. But because we know where to go, and the demographic analysis of where should we distribute is actually very scientific, then there's very little fat in the distribution operation, and they're put in front of people who want to receive it. And the demographic analysis is interesting. I mean, 3 years ago, City A.M did not distribute in Peckham. The distribution team have looked at the demographics and the house prices and the average incomes and said, right, we need to distribute in Peckham now because that's where our readers have gone. It's a very specific example. But certainly, to your original point, the idea of going into a newsagent's and handing over some coins and picking up the newspaper and going out is pretty old-fashioned. And my parents will still do that, and lots of places in the country where, of course, that's going, and there's still million plus people who will buy a copy of the Sun and buy a copy of the Mail. So I'm not disparaging of that, but it's not our demographic, and it's not our approach to distribution. And so the fact that we will be placed in front of you and handed to you, very often we have hundreds of people in blue jackets around London in the morning who will try and hand it to you. To try and minimise all friction between your copy and your potential reader is very important, obviously, and it's to such a degree that I know of instances where our distribution stack has been moved 6 feet away from the entrance to a tube station because some TfL bureaucrat has measured it and moved it away, and your distribution will go down because people won't move 6 feet out of their journey on the way to the tube station.
But if they're handed it, a lot more are going to accept it, aren't they, just to almost appease that person. But one thing I actually wanted to ask you is, do you ever feel that your age has either been a benefit or a negative impact on you as an editor of quite a large distributing newspaper?
I found that having grey hair has been a benefit.
It's more like a silver fox, like a Mr. Schofield.
That's what I was going to say.
I've gone full Schofield. Oh, okay. I joke about it, but I think in my previous career, in particular, in politics and in communications, I think grey hair actually did have me taken a bit more seriously in meetings with people who perhaps wouldn't have taken a 24 or 25-year-old as seriously as they did. But to the much more important point you raised about experience and about age and what you do, I've certainly never found it a hindrance, and it was going back to that conversation I had with the proprietors, who set out a very coherent rationale as to why they wanted me to stop what I was doing and become the editor, following in some pretty big footsteps. Alistair Heath, who is now editing the Sunday Telegraph. That was a very strange time for them to explain to me why they felt that was a good idea, and they had faith in me, and they put me in touch with other people in the industry who talked to me, and to whom I talked at great length over the summer of 2015 to get ready for day one, which was the Sunday the 17th of August, to do the newspaper for the 18th of August. So by that time I had a clearer sense of my, if not ability to do the role, my enthusiasm for the role and my willingness to give it a go and to get to grips with it. What I would say is that the part of it all, and the part of the journey that I found most difficult, was not the editorial decisions or writing my own opinion columns or redesigning the newspaper, which I did after a few months there, all those kind of things. I guess proving the proprietors right when they said, we think you can do this. And so okay, I took their word for it. They knew the sector and the product more than I did. Who was I to argue with them? I said, all right, I'll give it a go. What I found most challenging was, and still do, is the managerial side of it, and perhaps for want of a better word, the leadership side of it. You know, I had in the past worked in small teams, even in large organisations like the IOD. I'd been part of a reasonably small team in the policy unit there, and worked with people more than I did working, having people who worked for me. And then, of course, in this role, there is no getting away from the fact that you are the boss. You are, of course, legally responsible for anything that is said, printed, or carried online. You have a team of journalists. You have a team of editorial colleagues. You have a team of designers who look to you for the direction and the guidance. And then, of course, you also have all of the human resources and managerial issues that come with employing and being responsible for and managing a team of 30-odd employees. And I enjoy that, and I don't think I've had any major issues, but it has always been at the front of my mind that it's an area, not that I've been least comfortable with, but that I always worry, am I doing that right? Mm-hmm. Have I made the right decision on that? Am I managing this team correctly? Am I giving them enough feedback? Am I giving them enough praise? Do they respect me? All of these kind of questions that sort of run through your head. And I don't know whether that's to do with my age or whether it's just to do with the fact that I hadn't done it before. But I've been doing it for 3 years, and it's a pretty happy place, and it seems to be working. It's always there as a thought, am I doing this right? And it's easier to get a newspaper right, because you'll be aware if there are mistakes in it, and you can hold it in your hand at the end of the day and say, that's a good newspaper. Harder to quantify that with an organisation for whom you're of people for whom you're responsible. Also, our newsroom is quite young, our journalists are quite young, and they've got ambitions, and I'm figuring out how best to manage that millennial cohort. Fully conscious, despite my grey hair, I'm one of them myself. But for the purposes of my management exercises, I have to think of myself as being slightly out of that loop. And so, look, I'm 32, and most of my reporters are probably in their early to mid-20s. Mm-hmm. So there is obviously a sort of generational difference, but there is a difference in terms of how far along you are in your career, and I'm aware of that. And it's quite interesting. My fiance is a historian and a writer, and she's doing more and more work about generations and how generations interact with each other in the workplace. And she's giving speeches to every company in the city about having a millennial workforce, actually increasingly a sort of Gen Z workforce coming in, and what are their expectations and motivations. And I live that every day when I've got reporters who, whose ambitions and concerns I have to be aware of. I think I'm doing all right with it.
Do you think it helps a lot having that sort of younger, ambitious team?
Well, it's great, and there's no doubt about that. And it's always been the City A.M model that you have a few wise heads where you need them. And I think of our lifestyle editor, and our sports editor, and our comment editor, and the deputy editor. They've all been there for a long time. And actually, the reporter pool, there is churn, quite a lot of it actually. The turnover, the headcount is quite swift. So I've never worked it out, but the average tenure of a reporter is probably 18 to 36 months, something like that. Now, that's not... obviously, if somebody says I'm off, depending on who they are, you can fight pretty hard to retain them, and we've done that. But it's also the case that City A.M. has always been the pool in which the bigger newspapers will fish for their incoming business journalism talent. So the Telegraph, the Wall Street Journal, the Times, the Financial Times, Sky News are full of City A.M. alumni. So you're a new journalist, we hire people who are out of just on their journalism training, or they've done a year or a specialist publication with their first daily newspaper. And the good ones, and I like to think we only hire the good ones will get tapped on the shoulder. And sometimes you can say, listen, I don't think it's your time to go. You are going to go, but it shouldn't be now and it shouldn't be there. And you can build them a bit more of a career at City A.M. But what you have to accept is that they are going to go. And we've lost people even in the last few weeks to Bloomberg and elsewhere, and people have gone on to, they spread their wings. And when that happens, I always tell myself that it's better than a scenario whereby nobody would dream of hiring from City A.M. Yeah. You know what I mean? That notion that City A.M. is seen as a place that's got good young business journalists. Exactly. It's worth trying to poach them. And they do get poached. And so we do have quite a lot of turnover. I always think it's quite exciting. It's annoying. And it messes up the rota, and sometimes you've made a counter offer and their mind's made up and they're going to go to the Times, and it's fine. But it's also exciting. It keeps things alive a little bit, that there's going to be changes, and any time somebody does move on, it's an opportunity to reassess what they were doing, and do you want to do things differently. So I think we've got a very good, solid, stable top team, and we have a very hungry, keen team of younger journalists who, by the nature of the product at City A.M., if they were at a larger news organisation, they might very well spend the first 4 years of their career never getting further up front than page 25, page 45. It's not unusual for someone at City A.M. to write the front page story in their first week in the office, because that's the patch that's going to lead the front page, or that's the story, or that's the shift you're on late at night when something breaks. So there's nowhere to hide. Our reporters are all prominent. They're all on the front page. They're all hungry to be on the front page, and therefore they get noticed and they move on. But, that's the way.
It's a catch-22, isn't it? You can't really have one. You can't have the successful journalists without them getting pinched, can you? And that really is the whole mentality of our generation, per se, because a lot of the talk is that we're not going to have the same career for our whole entire life, and I think that's more about our generation than anything else. But obviously, we're going to sort of push forward, trying to get the better jobs, or so-called better jobs, and more exposure.
But I have to say, I have nothing but admiration for journalism in general. Journalists, particularly my young journalists, none of them have chosen this career to make money. None of them have chosen it to fast-track their way into a high-paying role. They have chosen it because they are journalists. They know that's what they want to be. They are sufficiently inquisitive, curious, sceptical. They like to write, they like to ask questions, they want to know what's really going on, they want to get behind a press release and into the story. And that's hugely admirable. And newsrooms rely on people coming in that have that hunger, that aren't just passing through, that want to be journalists. It's an unbelievably valuable element of society. It's hugely valuable to have a vibrant press, and it requires younger talent to come through and say, I want to do that. And when I interview journalists, I ask them where they want to be in 5 or 10 years. They don't say, I want to have bailed out and gone to a PR firm, or I'm hoping to go and get a job as a spinner at the Labour Party, or anything like that. That might actually be where they end up. But at the time that at least they're starting out, what they want to be is a journalist. They know which journalists they admire, they know the stories every day they wish they'd got, and they want to do it. And so I'm fortunate that for now, at least in their career, they want to do it at City A.M.
Yeah, and obviously it's just cool that you're kind of exposed to that sort of ambition as well. And then the fact that it's a massive badge to have that these kind of big organisations and big news firms are coming to, I don't know, poach your journalists. That must be a credit to sort of the structure that you've got going on there as well.
Well, that's what I try and tell myself, because it is bloody annoying when someone comes and says, I've had a phone call from Bloomberg, I've applied for a job at the Times, and you think, well, okay, I can understand that. You've done 2 years, and you want to do that, make that move, and you are very good. So of course you understand that. But it is frustrating, and I feel like there are those towns in America that have a sign on the road that says number of days without a road traffic fatality. I feel like I could have one of those signs outside my office, number of days without a resignation, and reset it every so often to 0, because people move on. And actually, I have learned to stop worrying and love the chaos. Yeah. That's always been the nature of City A.M, and there's nothing I can do in my tenure as editor to lock all our journalists in for 5 or 6 years, because they're going to come and they're going to go. And what we have to do is get the best out of them and give them the best opportunities during the time they're with us.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it?
When you're writing your articles within City A.M, how do you deal with bias? Do you try and stay unbiased? What's your kind of approach to that?
No, I'm very biased. I have my biases, and I wear them on my sleeve. And broadly, they fall into matters of principle.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the case of industries or projects that I've worked in the past. I have believed in certain things. I'm a social and economic liberal, and that economic liberalism is a harder case to make in this day and age, post-crash, than it used to be. But actually, I think that means it's more important that we make that case in this day and age. And I'm a social liberal, and those are my biases. And so I have my own column in the newspaper every Friday, where it's kind of whatever I want to write about. It's first person, and that's my opinions and my thoughts and my little bits of gossip if I want. There is a leader column on page 2 in the newspaper, which I introduced a couple of years ago, and I write the majority of those, but I have a team of other people at the newspaper who write leader columns too. But there's nothing that would appear in that column on page 2 that I didn't agree with, or that I didn't feel made the case that I think City A.M should be making. So even if I don't write that leader column, it ain't going to go to print if I don't agree with it. So, and those are robustly kind of pro-business, pro-market views, scepticism about the role of the state, being sceptical about the merits of arbitrarily high taxation. These are not that controversial concepts. I mean, these positions are backed up. I just don't think they're made robustly enough elsewhere. So those are the sorts of things that I want to write about in the leader column. In my own column on a Friday, the one that's got my mug on it, I can write about whatever I choose, and that can be quite political, or it could be any kind of thought that's come into my head, or anything I want to reflect on, as much as it could be about the city and the square mile. So those are my biases, and I don't try and hide them. Where I think it is important, very important, to retain some objectivity and to present both sides of an argument, is in your news coverage. And actually, I'm very, very strict, I think, about not editorialising in our news coverage. Now, some readers, some critics might disagree with that statement. I think the news is the news, and you can determine what's important, what's most valuable, what's the priority, but you can't spin it. And that's what I used to do for a living, by the way. So in my sort of 10 years before becoming an editor, not quite 10 years, I was in communications, and I was a campaigner and an advocate for certain positions. So I'm well aware of how you can do that. In news, it's very different. There's nowhere to hide from it. I mean, short of saying we're not going to cover that story because it doesn't fit with the narrative that we're trying to articulate, there's nothing you can do. So if, for the sake of argument, you are a publication who is pro-Brexit to the hilt, yet you are faced every day with evidence of a shrinking economy and negative sentiment, what are you going to do? Not report that? I mean, that's not. It's just not right. Yeah. So now, I am a Eurosceptic, and I think the paper is actually in a lot of its positions. It did not pick a position in the referendum. That was my decision. I could have chosen to do so. I could have chosen for City A.M to back the Remain campaign. Nobody would have noticed. I could have backed the Brexit campaign, which would have probably alienated a lot of our readers.
Yeah.
What I thought we should do is hold both campaign claims to account, to scrutinise both campaigns, to scrutinise the arguments they put forward, and we did that literally side by side in print on any given topic in the run-up to the referendum. This is what they say, this is what they say. On the day of the referendum itself, we had a comment piece penned by David Cameron alongside, on the page, a comment piece penned by Michael Gove, both of whom were making a very specific pitch to the City audience. That, I think, was a much more valuable service to the readership than saying, well, we feel this is how you should vote. I think that's quite an old-fashioned thing to do as a media organisation. But it's no surprise, and it's probably no surprise just reading the newspaper, that take, for example, the current incarnation of the Labour Party. I think their economic position, leaving aside Corbyn and McDonnell's record on foreign and security policy, I think would be disastrous for the country. Absolutely disastrous for the country at an individual level and for the City of London. So, I will report their policies. We will report their speeches. We will give them due prominence. John McDonnell makes a speech about the economy. We will put it on the front page because I think readers need to know what these guys are planning to do if they get into power. Yeah. So don't shy away from it. It's in my own columns that I can then pick it apart and say, I think this is seriously fucking dangerous. Which it is, by the way. I'm happy to expand on that.
Please do. Please do.
Well, if one looks simply at the main arguments in policy debate at the moment, they are between vast swathes of state control, nationalisation of huge sectors of the economy, for no reason other than the fact that that's what you've wanted to do for 40 years. There's not a good enough reason to do it. When every sensible economist and analyst says simply attempting to nationalise rail, water, electricity, telephones, I mean, you name it, is going to bog yourselves down in 10 years of international legal challenge, is going to be costing about £200 billion, is going to have no real positive consequences, and is purely an ideological pursuit, which is what you find at the core of a couple of old blowhard socialists who, by whatever mechanism, found themselves leading Her Majesty's opposition. So I think it's very dangerous, and I'm not going to shy away from it. I'm not going to tire of pointing out that I think Jeremy Corbyn is a danger to national security. I think the positions he's taken over the course of 30 years, whether it's his instinctive support for socialist dictators in Cuba, a place that used to try and re-educate gays, a place that bans trade unions and free media, Venezuela, a place which is descending into authoritarian chaos, instinctive support for terror groups in the Middle East, instinctive support by Jeremy Corbyn and those around him for any organisation that defines itself as being anti-Western or anti-British is very dangerous. And you can look at examples of Corbyn and the Labour Party on their positions in instinctive support for members of the IRA. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn protested outside the trial of the Brighton bomber, and he was on the editorial board of a magazine who described that attack as a good start. I mean, I think this man is, to his core, wrong. I don't care if he's cuddly, or if he gets the crowd chanting at Glastonbury, or if he's got an allotment, or if he's not like other politicians, or whatever reason it is that people like him. I think he's dangerous. And so I'll say that occasionally in my column as well.
Christian, what do you really think about Jeremy Corbyn, though?
I think I like how you don't shy away from it, for one, but also that the paper itself kind of retains the objectivity of it. Because I think there's too much
sort of blasé approach to everything, trying to appease everyone, almost, but sometimes. Also,
I don't know, some people I feel like would be too afraid to sort of engage in that debate and take in the opposite side of view as well. I feel like it's easy to kind of say this is my view, and then automatically that alienates a whole group of people, if you get what I mean, instead of engaging in that debate.
No, I'm not going to claim that in the news pages of City A.M. there is 100% impartiality and objectivity, because I will determine which stories in our politics page we want to run, and they ain't going to often be very friendly towards Jeremy Corbyn and his policies. Nevertheless, we'll give him a fair hearing.
Yeah, well, that's
He's welcome to write for us, as is John McDonnell. The shadow ministers in the Treasury brief, do write for us, and actually plenty of Labour figures who are less extreme, less ideological, and less dangerous, who write for us quite often, because I'm sure plenty of our readers are Labour supporters, even if they despair at the current state of that party. So this is not about being a Tory or a Labour supporter.
Yeah.
By the way, we have poured a lot of cold water over Theresa May. No great love and affection for her.
Yeah.
Poured a lot of cold water over the last Tory manifesto. So we're not cheerleaders for anyone. And actually, if you can accuse us of anything, it's of being too cynical about a lot of them. But for their own reasons, they deserve it.
Exactly.
So I think when it comes to Labour, plenty of people whose opinions we value and listen to, plenty of more sensible people within that party who we engage with. I'm afraid I have to draw a line at the leadership of McDonnell and Corbyn and their closest advisors, who are a bunch of Stalinist and supporting Marxists who for 30 years have tried to undermine the positions this country has stood for, who have a deeply worrying ideological experiment up their sleeves. And I think it's very dangerous, and I will say so.
But I think a lot of people wouldn't go so far as to even entertain anyone from the other side of it, especially
just because they don't agree.
Students.
You think just because they don't agree with them, they wouldn't
very
invite them to talk.
I am this side. I am this side.
And I won't
you know what I mean?
really appease
And I
that
won't-
side.
yeah.
That's what I think
That's
is
what
the
I'm trying to
big
say,
thing. Yeah.
But every single day in our comment pages, we run, this is a popular feature, we run the debate. And I'm amazed. I think we're the only newspaper that does this. In fact, I'm sure we are. And I think every newspaper should do it. So every single day, we'll pick a topical question. Could be business and economic related, could be political. We'll ask the question and we'll have a yes and a no side fighting for it. And I know that that's actually a very popular aid in university classes, and lecturers and teachers quite often start the day by putting that up on the screen. And there's not enough places to do that. Here is the question. Should we be worried about Facebook and Cambridge Analytica? Yes, no. Should taxes exceed 35% of GDP? Yes or no? And there are, in almost every instance, very good grounds for either position.
Yeah.
That we will find intelligent and sincere people who will put forward the case for yes and the case for no. And that's called debate, and that's important, and there's not enough of it. So we'll do that, and we do that every day in print, and you can find it online. And I think that's an important contribution that we make to our comment pages. Alongside that, our comment pages are quite robust in their own views, and our columnists and our commentators. We are not a left-wing newspaper. I don't think we're a right-wing newspaper, by the way, either. If you take, for example, the Mirror and the Guardian being of the left and the Mail being of the right, I don't think we fit on that spectrum because, as I said at the very beginning of all this, we are socially and economically liberal, and most places are one or the other.
Yeah.
Or you're socially conservative or you're economically conservative. So, we believe in competition. We believe in fair markets. We believe in free markets. We believe in individual liberty. We believe in the aggregate benefits of capitalism over socialism. These are our kind of foundational principles for our commentary and for our editorial position.
And has that always been the case at City A.M?
I think it's always been the case, and I don't think I would have been invited to become editor if I held views contrary to that position. That said, I have, in 3 years, nearly 3 years as editor, I don't think I can recall of a single instance of proprietorial influence. And I was actually, early on and to a degree remain staggered at the amount of freedom I have to determine what that newspaper says and what it covers. So the owners of the newspaper who are there, they run the business, they're at the other end of the office, I talk to them, but they've never asked me to do something in print or not do something. And from what I can gather, talking to friends of mine who work in other newspapers, that's quite rare.
So am I right in thinking you joined in 2015?
Yeah.
So surely before then, or since you've joined, there must have been a slight shift in the stance, or would you kind of disagree with that in terms of?
Well, Alistair Heath was the editor for 8 or 9 years, and Alistair is not a man who minces his words, and he is a proper free marketeer, a robust advocate and defender of small state, small government, low taxes, economic liberty, etc. Very, very good. So I knew I couldn't just try to be Alistair Mark II.
Yeah.
And I had to do my own thing with it. After Alistair went to the Telegraph, I think the paper had a period where they had an interim editor, an internal promotion or something. Anyway, for whatever reason, the proprietors felt that it didn't work out or it wasn't working. And so they came up with Plan B or Plan C, which was me. And I think it's probably fair that they were looking for an editor who could bring a bit more politics to the paper.
Mm-hmm.
One who demonstrated a sort of broad commitment to the principles of being pro economic liberalism, pro competition, who got business, who understood business, but somebody who was also going to do their own thing with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think over the course of the last few years, I have done that.
Yeah.
So Christian, looking to sort of wrap things up, as much as we'd like to continue to engage with a lot of this, because I think it's been super interesting for all of us. We are asked one final question to our guests, which is focused on sort of an age thing, and obviously you're fairly still young, and in a really good position to give this advice. So we always ask, what advice would you give to a young person looking to sort of follow their career goals, whatever that may be?
I feel that I've benefited either through accident or design in my career to date by some great opportunities, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm simply the beneficiary of good luck and good timing, because there's a lot of hard work,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no substitute for that. Seizing opportunities that come your way, and working hard to stand out and to be taken seriously. However, it's also the case that you should not become fixated with a linear career. This is what I want to be, and this is how I think I can get there. My advice, even if I only see the benefits of this in hindsight, is not to be afraid to zigzag.
Yeah.
I was running essentially a think tank, and being the spokesperson for a business lobby group on Pall Mall, and a month later I found myself editing a newspaper in the square mile. I had no plan for that. I had no ambitions in that direction. I don't think it was purely good luck. I think I can look back in hindsight and see the dots that join that line. But I said yes to things even when I wasn't completely convinced that I knew what I was going to do once I got there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's quite a long-winded way of saying that people should be open to opportunities even if they seem unorthodox.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But principally, nothing has changed, whether it's our parents' generation or their parents' generation. You have to work hard. You have to work bloody hard. And that will bring rewards.
Mm-hmm.
Within that, you can afford to be a bit creative.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant answer.
Yeah, really good answer.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for listening to session number 7 of the Bull Sessions. Don't forget to pick up a copy of City A.M. on your morning commutes. And please check out Christian on social media. Thank you very much, Christian, for being on today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for listening. I've been Henry Martin.
I've been Tom West.
And for as long as I can remember, I've been Ross Jeffries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening to session number 7 of the Bull Sessions, titled Christian May or May Not Divulge into His Life of City A.M. Editor-in-Chief.
We would be so grateful if you could leave a rating and a review. We have had some feedback that some of you haven't been able to leave reviews, and we think this is because you haven't been choosing a unique enough nickname. So if you could do that, that'd be absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Always be yourself, because everyone else is already taken.
That's Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde quote. And if you're inputting the username Amy, please be a bit more unique. Thank you very much.
You can find us on Twitter at Bull Sessions Pod, Facebook The Bull Sessions, or if you'd like to engage with some premium content, our Instagram is at The Bull Sessions. or email us, get in contact, send us some questions on thebullsessionspod@gmail.com.
Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Cheers.
See you later.